will issues like the single point collection for sales taxes be introduced as separate pieces of legislation, or will it be bundled into an all or nothing bill?
In terms of the actual legislation, we're looking at two parts. The first part will be the revenue swap situation, is what people are terming it, the elimination of the income tax, expansion of the sales tax base. And then there would be a second part that would handle more of the administrative issues with sales tax and or just tax collection and simplifying it. So it would be two different parts.
Different bills?
Two different bills, yes.
My question's pretty simple. Just on services, we'll be, assume this passes, we'll be paying sales tax on services, and that would include all services like services of a doctor, any kind of medical services. The insurance companies would have to pay the sales tax on what the doctor charges for his services, or any healthcare practitioner.
Well, I don't know what's in the plan. I was just reminded of that, but obviously Mr. DeQueer doesn't either, because every time I ask a question, well, you just go look to Texas for your model. If you go to Texas, you can pull up the services that are taxed over there. We've been told that's where to look to see what we would do here in Louisiana, and those services would not be taxed. And that's probably for policy reasons and political reasons. There are lots of lawyers in the legislature. I'm one. So putting the sales tax on legal services would probably not be received well. You have everybody requires medical services, and they're expensive, and so putting the sales tax on that would also be very problematic. And I think there are enough accountants in the legislature that we're not going to put a sales tax when somebody figures out how much income tax you owe. So those things are not in the Texas model. I would have to assume they're not going to be in the package when it comes out. But you bring up a good point, because the way they did this in Texas and elsewhere, we will just, I suspect, I haven't seen it, we're going to have a list of maybe 15 or 20 service areas that will be subject to the sales tax. It will then be up to the Department of Revenue through a rule promulgation process to decide exactly which activities under those areas are subject to the tax. So when we vote on this, not only will we not know the amount of the tax we're telling people they're going to have to pay, we won't know exactly what services they're going to be paying it on.
The Texas side indicated inheritance taxes and volunteer firefighter taxes as well. Just was curious if that's something we've talked about.
In terms of the services, we're obviously looking to expand the base. We, as Representative Edwards said correctly, we're looking at many of the services that are in the Texas base. We're not necessarily married to the Texas base. I haven't seen anything in terms of volunteer firefighters or inheritance taxes that would be in the base. I think in terms of our estimates right now, we haven't gone as far as any of the professional services or CPAs or lawyers, but the services range, they're pretty wide ranging in terms of personal services or other, types of services that are potentially could be added to the base. Yeah.
Why can't we have an up or down vote on both components of this bill? If we're going to eliminate exemptions, okay, and we're going to have a central administration, okay, that is the action and the consequence and how it's going to be carried out. Why can't that be put together in one package so it's up or down? If you get the exemptions removed, then this is what's going to handle them, rather than split them so they're negotiated separately and we don't even know what we're going to end up with. Jason, start with you.
So, and I see the House Clerk back there, Mr. Butch Spear, and we've had these conversations. You really get into whether or not the single object test and how much you can actually put into one bill. And so we're very cognizant of that. And right now, it looks as if, the part one would meet the test as I described it in terms of the revenue swap, and then part two would be a separate issue, more of the administration and collection functions of the tax. And so it really butts up to the legalities and the single object, and you have to be very mindful of that when you put more than several components into one bill.
Okay. John Bell, you want to use that?
Yeah. I actually think he's exactly right, and it's refreshing to have an administration attorney recognize the single object requirement in the Constitution. But he's right. I have a question, quite frankly, as to whether you can do this in just two pieces, because the first piece would have the repeal of the income tax, the increase of the sales tax, I guess the listing of the services. It would have something to do with the film tax credit, the enterprise zone tax credit, the severance tax exemption repeal. It's going to be very hard to do that, I suspect, and maintain your single object limitation. But certainly, you're going to require at least two bills to do this.
That having been said, it goes to the second question. Does not your proposal have to go to the people because it is in the Constitution, the sales tax? So that anything that the legislature is doing in this term relative to changing the tax code and the sales tax, increasing sales tax, will have to go to the people? Yes or no?
No, I don't think. No.
John?
I'm not a constitutional lawyer.
Okay?
And that's not a yes or no question.
Well,
whatever. I think I could have that one. I don't think it would require a vote of the people to do it at the state level. But there is a real trick here with the locals. If you look at the local sales tax ballot language by which school districts, police juries, towns, villages have imposed upon themselves sales taxes, in many, many cases, when they list sale of services, there is also a definition that is much narrower than what is being proposed by the administration. And this is what I shared with the governor the other day personally. I don't believe we can constitutionally enlarge the scope of sales taxes beyond that which the voters understood at the time they voted to put the sales tax on themselves. And if it wasn't in the language of the act that these people were voting on, then you can't do it. And so this uniform base that they are proposing will require, I believe, if we do this, all of these political subdivisions to go back to the people to vote to ratify this change. And they will be asking people to ratify this change knowing that they then have the highest sales tax in the nation. It won't happen. And we will then revert to property taxes.
So how do they pay for the bonds that they did the sales tax?
That's a good question.
Okay, Joel, do you have an answer to that? Jason? I mean, if we have to go back, come on up here. If we have to go back to the people and ask them to approve this extra tax that would be above what they understood when they passed the tax locally, how do they meet their obligation for their bonds?
So in terms of the constitutional question, there's a provision in this big book that's the Uniform Local Tax Code, and members of local governments come to the legislature all the time and enact taxes or exemptions, and you can do that. The only concern would be is if you were trying to eliminate some of the constitutional exemptions, such as food for home or prescription drugs. And as I've mentioned, at this time, we're going to retain those exemptions that are constitutional in nature, and so you wouldn't need a constitutional amendment to do that.
Okay. Joel, did you have anything you want to add to that? Well, I'd like to take this time to ask you to thank our presenters for coming. And now I will inform you about next month that we're very, very excited about. We will, first of all, it'll be on a different day. It will be on Thursday, the 14th of March. And our perspective focus will be on the future of education in Louisiana. From the administration, we will only have two presenters. From the administration, we have invited John White, Superintendent of the Department of Education. If he cannot come, then we have, it falls to Chaz Romer as the chair of Bessie. And if he cannot come, then Stafford Pollinari, who is the education advisor to the governor. On the other perspective, because we're strictly doing the governor's perspective, and a different perspective. The other perspective, we haven't heard back from Dr. White, and that's on, to be fair, we just sent out the invitation today to all three, asking them to select who's going to represent the general administration. But the other side has wrote back immediately and has accepted, and that is Dr. Diane Ravitch, who is the former Assistant Secretary from the Bush administration, and who has a very different perspective, and we sincerely hope you all come. It's on the 14th of March, right here, and don't forget to join Leaders with Vision. Thank you for coming. Goodbye.